Okay, so today I'm going to have a discussion that I've had in the past a number of times, but basically I used to review movies, and the best movie of all time, according to me, or I guess it's hard to decide between my favorite, like saying, oh, it's my favorite movie, and it's the best movie, but I could say almost both, right? Certainly the screenplay is insanely good, and it's original. It's not based on anything, the way that, like, The Godfather is or something like that, right? So when you look at the greatest screenplays, it's at least the greatest screenplay, because it's so original, it's so dynamic, it's so, there's lines like, "You never had a camera in my head." So if you can guess what it is, obviously from the title, The Truman Show. So the best movie ever made. Film critic analyzes. I couldn't fit all that in the title. But basically, I recently made a clip that was about this too, or that at least mentioned it, and it basically, I was using it to explain the simulation theory. So this is what The Truman Show does at the surface level, is think about it, okay, it's a satire on reality TV, and, it predicted some of the celebrity culture and obsession with mundane, parts of people's lives and things like that, right? The modern day reality TV and IRL streamers and imagine IRL streaming, what a clown you'd have to be, but reject cult of personality by not doing face cam, even though this driving cam is kind of dumb too, but whatever. But no, that's on the surface level. Okay, fine. It's a satire on reality TV and cult of personality and celebrity and things like that, right? That's fine, and it's effective and it works on that level. That's what probably initially people would think about it. Well, what I've always interpreted from it, or how I see it, and again, you could say I'm overthinking it or something, but it kind of works at that level regardless. Is the Sea Haven, obviously the town in which Truman lives, is an analogy for society itself. So think about society as a carefully curated entity, right? It's not naturally occurring, and everything is contrived and curated. So you want to believe that that's real, or you're kind of trained and indoctrinated to believe that that's real and absolute, but it's really not. It's objectively not. And so what that means is, it's carefully curated, but you still take it seriously, and it's kind of arbitrary. Every era of human civilization has been like that, where to some degree, where there's some false absolute to bypass your critical thinking. Could be God, could be something else, maybe moral gratification, or again, the weaponization of medicine and medical terms in modern day, like all these things that make this uniform state of people all kind of relatively doing the same thing, being the same way, which is not natural at all, right? Is you need like a false absolute to bypass critical thinking. So there's a lot of projection and false duality. Like if somebody just simply is doing something different, right, living a different lifestyle, you would somehow say, oh, that, like, let's say somebody is a minimalist and they want to live out in the woods or something like that, and they're happy with doing that, you would say, oh no, they just lack the ability. They lack the ability to live in society or be a part of society. Not that they wouldn't choose something different, right? It's like Bolshevik rhetoric, again, false duality. There can only be two options. Either you do the contrived state exactly the way uniformly that people are trained to do, like animals, or you lack the ability to do it, or you're doing it just to spite it or something, right? Like anti. It can't just be, oh, you could choose something different. And then that opens the floodgates. Oh, then maybe they want to do something different. Maybe everybody would do something different. And, the human variable, I call it, there wouldn't just be one uniform way of doing everything. So that's one interpretation at a relatively simple level. But, like, again, think of society, oh, it's carefully curated. You don't think a lot of thought is put into this, so it's kind of a disservice. Like, think about the amount of thought that the government puts into controlling you every day. And think about the amount of effort that the media puts into deceiving you every day and carefully curating the stories. But you take them at face value. So there's these carefully curated processes, but you take them at face value, so therefore you're controlled by them, right? And then, oh, if you're aware of that, oh, you're somehow paranoid or conspiracy theorist. But it's just like, no, it's like, be aware of the nature of the process. It's happening either way, but people would rather be dumb and pretend, oh no, everything's fine, things are the way they are because that's the way they're meant to be, instead of realizing the flawed, subjective, imperfect, artificial nature of society and people and contrivance. And it's a man-made thing, right? So it's variable. It can be exploited. It can be, misused. And so what that means is you're basically, again, a process that has a great deal, this is almost the inverse of one of my logical razors, where I say something like if somebody says something dumb, or like, oh, it's supposed to be an insult, but it's something just totally false or nonsensical, you shouldn't be offended by something like that, because it's just arbitrary. Like, oh, you have 3 feet, or oh, you have, whatever. So it's something that's just like not based in reality. The problem with that is the fact that since it didn't require any thought to say it, right, that which requires no thought deserves none. So if it required no thought to say it, then it doesn't deserve any in return, right? That you shouldn't consider it because, oh, it's just nonsense. And so this is kind of the inverse of that, where a process, this is actually like a new logical razor as I'm explaining this, that I'm, at least the phrasing of it that I'm coming up with, is a process that is carefully curated and artificial and manufactured and has so much time and effort and thought and resources put into it, right? Right, so a process that exists, first of all, everything is a process, right? Like, even you'll say, oh, love and soulmate and this and that. Oh, it's just it's nature's way of inspiring reproduction, and we can break it down on a scientific level. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but if simply being aware of a process invalidates it, then maybe that's not the fault of the awareness, it's the fault of the process, right? So it's hard to predict if you're acutely aware of that at all times as you're doing it. Oh, I'm only attracted to this person, or in the sexual encounter because, oh, that's nature's way of inspiring reproduction. So I'm like a horny, hedonistic animal, and so, right, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, doesn't mean you can't do it. In fact, if anything, you'd be maybe more free to do it then, instead of restricting it to one person. But it'd be hard to pose it as a false absolute if you're actually accurately aware of the nature of the process. And so what that means is, right, everything is a process, and so you can either be aware of it and counteract it, or be in control of it, or decide it for yourself, choose it, or you could not be aware of it, and then be controlled by it and pretend like it's absolute, it's meant to be, etc. But wouldn't you rather be aware of it? It's present either way, the same observable practice and process. So the logical razor is a process that has a lot of thought put into it, right? Like government and media and all these things. These are not just naturally occurring things, and they're not absolute, and they're not perfect, and they can be misused and exploited, and they're just by definition artificial and contrived. That which has a lot of thought and effort put into it should require a certain amount of thought and consideration from you as well. Meaning, like, the government, the media, all these things that are established, you just take them at face value, and therefore you're easily controlled by them, instead of realizing, oh no, let me actually be aware of the nature of the process. And that's often how people are, right? You reject awareness. Like, it's the same process across the board, right? Everyone's doing the same thing, whether it be, okay, companies are trying to sell you a product, or governments are trying to control you, or, media is trying to deceive you or push a certain narrative. So whether you're aware of it or not, that process is present, right? That incentive is present. So, but if you somehow point that out, or if you're aware of that, that's negative. So, like, in other words, people wouldn't like that process and would have an issue with it if they were aware of it. So the solution is, let's not take issue with the process. Let's just, if we're not aware of it and we don't think about it and we kind of euphemize it and overcompensate for it and dress it up, therefore we right, the issue is awareness of the process, not the process itself, which is the same. So seems like the algorithm has abandoned me a little bit these last couple episodes. We're not getting those little jumps and spikes, which we probably should still sometimes, but it was usually pretty good about that. Or maybe they just do that at the beginning when you start streaming on YouTube, because, but I have enjoyed this experience with the YouTube thing. The only thing I don't like is for gaming stuff. I might actually have to split it up, because the gaming VODs, I swear, come out so shitty. The quality is encoding and stuff is good for stuff like this, because I don't really care at 720p anyway. But no, what I'm saying is, you put a certain amount of thought into a process that exists, otherwise you're just easily controlled by it. And then there's like a specified, personalized issue, what I call like the initial basis compared to rule by omission. Like, the same thing's going on behind the scenes, but you don't care because it's not obvious to you, it's not in front of you, even though you can be aware that it's happening behind closed doors, etc. right? You know it's happening. You know something is happening right now in your country and corporations, whatever, that's nefarious, that's exploitative, but you just don't want to think about it. So the issue is the thinking and the awareness, not the actual process itself, that you're well aware every era of history is done, right? That's the issue. But you would do it on an individual basis, like, oh, look, somebody in front of you is behaving in a certain way, and oh, you'll pick on their idiosyncrasies, and it's like selective awareness, right? That's why neutrality is such a strong thing, because it reflects back, hey, how's it going? Because it reflects back, right, the nature of a contrivance to itself, and then people would have an issue with it. People would have an issue with it if they were aware of it, but right, they're just simply not aware, or they try to fight that awareness and act like thinking and objectivity is the issue, and even like specifying and personalizing thought. I've been in one of your, yeah, I think I remember you, yeah, I've seen you. How's it going? But yeah, so one of the points with, again, the Truman Show on the surface level, okay, it's a satire on reality TV, which, again, on that level alone, it's good. On an entertainment level, it's good. It's very fast-paced. It's only 90 minutes, so it doesn't waste a lot of time. It's very, very to the point. Pretty much the only opportunity that it misses, which would have been hard to do, I guess, the way it's written, is it misses the opportunity of turning it into, like, a twist for the audience. Like, I mean, obviously, even the name and even the, you know, it starts off with the documentary scene of them, like, doing an interview of, like, oh, we're talking about the Truman Show. It's like, it doesn't try to hide the fact that that's what it's about from the audience. But it could have been played like that, where, right, that could have been another layer, which, again, it would have been a totally different movie then, but it would have been like, you don't know whether Truman's crazy, and maybe there's still some implication, like maybe he's imagining all this, but it kind of doesn't make sense when you see the interviews of some of the characters and stuff. But you know, the point is that he's what was I saying? Oh yeah, like, it could have been a twist type of thing where you don't know whether it's to show yourself as the audience, and you're kind of left to wonder too. But, you know, so it doesn't try to hide it from you that way. But again, we can talk about the technical stuff. There's a lot of avant-garde camera angles that are really good, right, where it shows you, like, kind of, in fact, you might be able to trace back every single camera angle from the audience perspective is also the camera angle of the show, which actually isn't true. Right, I would like to believe that, like, oh, every camera you see pointed at Truman is actually a camera that they have on the show. But the reason why it can't be that is because there's times where you see Truman doing stuff that isn't actually known to them, right? Or like when they're watching his little stuffed toy that's snoring, right, as he's actually not there. So that, you know, and like it shows Truman on the boat or something, they're not watching him then because they don't know, right? They didn't know that he did that. So, right, like there are times where it shows camera angles that wouldn't actually be, it might be something that they could theoretically have access to, but it's not something they're actually watching at the time. So it's not like you're watching just strictly the show, right? There are other things that you see. Right, but by that logic, you can say, well, they have cameras everywhere, so that, you know, they could be watching it if they want. Right, you should have done a bug sweep of the boat when he gets on the boat. But no, it's like, this guy, you know, is obviously the ordinary man, the everyman. He's kind of you and me in society. So this is the bigger analogy that I always draw, right? That the Truman Show isn't about reality TV and so to imply that your life is on rails, right? That everything's kind of controlled and preconceived. You're born, you don't choose to be born, you don't choose where, you don't choose the area, the family, anything like that. You go through school, you go through, you know, you get a job, you get a white picket fence, you have a wife, you have a family. And so without really choosing anything, you choose things within those confines, but everything is kind of on rails and structured for you, right? There's no variance, there's no self-actualization or choice, and then you struggle with that and act like, oh no, it must be your issue, it must be, you know, something else. You're kind of always waiting for something, but you realize none of that stuff is absolute, right? Maybe you don't want those things, it's not so uniform, but you're kind of pressured and forced, and so you feel like your whole life is on rails, and then before you realize it, oh, you're 30-something or whatever, and then you have a midlife crisis, and it's like, or even like teenagers, oh, you've been indoctrinated throughout your whole youth, and now you can finally think for yourself and like, oh, look how rebellious they are. And this is the ultimate false duality. And it really, this is why stimuli acme preservation is such a sin of objectivity, because you really can't justify that perspective. Like, you would hold it over their head. Like, you have kids, you choose to have kids, you don't have to do that, you shouldn't do that. Then you hold it over their head and use that to try to validate yourself. And again, society, oh, look, we fed you and you needed us, like, but you also created that, and you also inhibited every aspect of life and monopolized nature itself, etc., etc. So what it means is there's no actual basis of credibility there. It actually hurts the credibility of the people doing that and creating that, but it shows you the lack of credibility that society and contrivance has, because you can't assume a person's intent. You can't. So you'll say, oh, they're rebellious, but rebellious against what? Against this heavily inhibiting, rigid structure that assumes people's intent and what they want to do and everything in their life, and you can't assume that. Okay, that person wants to go live out in the woods, but they won't be allowed to, or that person wants to do various other lifestyles or anything else on the planet. It's like, oh, look at them rebelling. It's like, again, the animal thing. You take an animal from nature and you put it in a cage, and then, oh, you might feed it well and take care of it, and you act like, well, look, it should be grateful, even though you stole it. You're enslaving it, trapping it in a cage. Right, human beings the same way, training them like animals, trapping them in society in a contrived state, inhibiting and controlling every aspect of their life. And then what do? You say, oh, look how they're rebelling against it, as if that's their outward practice. No, they're inherently just doing things that they can do. They're just doing things that human beings naturally, inherently can do. And society is imposing itself on them and acting like, oh no, we know better than you what you want or what you would desire or what you would do, and we're going to force we're going to assume what you want, right? It's one thing, again, non-consensual social contract, but it is a forced, subversive state, right? It is not a qualified state, which is why by preserving the stimuli acme, you're vouching for it, but you really don't vouch for it, right? With the constant conflict of contrivance that you have. So there's like this cultish contest of gratification. Who could tolerate an unqualified contrived state better? But by that logic, they would all be reinforced and regurgitated no matter what. Because, it's like, who could tolerate Nazi Germany better? Who could tolerate China right now, communist China right now better? So, in other words, oh, you just can't deal with it, stop being so entitled and spoiled. So nothing can ever be wrong with the nature of the process. Instead, it's, oh, your ability to overcompensate for it and tolerate it. And then the other point is the fact that, again, the nature of the process, if you're aware, and it's like you frame it in false duality and you assume. So if you inhibit, again, you indoctrinate people when they're young before they're old enough to think for themselves, which is kind of a predatory, very, very questionable thing that you might think, oh, but it's necessary or it's a good result. But the problem is that it shouldn't be necessary, should it? Right? Or by that logic, again, you can do that in any era, any civilization would lead to people following along mindlessly as you could like. So indoctrination is highly effective, but should it really be necessary if, oh, what we're doing is the right thing in the right way in the right society? Okay, then don't indoctrinate them at all. And then once they're old enough, they should be able to decide that for themselves, but you don't do that, right? So it's very predatory. Again, it threatens in the empirical basis, unqualified empirical authority. We're going to threaten to starve you out or, take monopoly over resources and then act like you need us after, in that case, even creating you. So, right, it's a self-fulfilling fallacy. When can the contrivance state ever be wrong, right? And so, or just contrivance itself unqualified. So you can indoctrinate people before they're old enough to think for themselves, and then as soon as they are able to think for themselves, everything is framed in false duality. Oh, look at them being rebellious to a false absolute that we pose and that we had the advantage of indoctrinating them into, right? And they still don't abide by it. So, oh, that's somehow rebellious. Like, rebellious to what? Right? The assumed intent that you're forcing upon them. Again, you put an animal in a cage and then act like, why is it being so defiant? Why is it banging its head against the wall? Why is it trying to break free? Right? Like, how could it possibly do that? Well, what a rebel. What a rebellious thing to do. It's the same process, despite the form, right? The bread and circuses type thing distracts people, but appeases people. That's really, you say, like, what defines an era of human civilization? If people carefully think about it, or, we have laws and we have a certain, pretense of value, but what really defines it? And it's like, oh, people have adequate bread and circuses and technology and distraction and polyfavoritism and indoctrination in youth and bypassing critical thinking and false absolutes of value and specify, right? Like, all these things that don't actually qualify value, right? They're just, it'll be enough for the mass majority of people to be controlled by. That's what being normal is. Oh, you're just easy, mindless sheep to control. And it's also like, it's also, you're an easy, mindless sheep to control, and it apply to every era the same way that you kind of bypass critical thinking, and you kind of just, it's anything but logic and reason. And again, there's never a uniform state, so you assume people's intent, and then you somehow use it as a basis to control them, rationalize controlling them. Everybody needs control, and then you have to, like, do the fallacy of earning back the right to do inherent things that you're capable of doing. Like fallacy of permission. You need permission to do everything, not that you need to hold accountable contrivance for inhibiting things that you can do for having a good reason to stop you from doing it. And again, there's like the self-fulfilling inhibition and deferred to lowest common denominator social contrivance aspect. The fact that basically, right, you have to dumb everything down to the social collective mass level, and then in doing that, you're sort of deferring to it and dumbing it down, and then that somehow validates it, or again, like, you're inhibited in so many ways. Like, oh, you follow all these rules and laws, and some of them you can say, okay, there's an actual good reason for it, but a lot of them are like, oh, look, you can't do, look at your lack of capability, even though human beings' potential is much greater. We're going to restrict everything that you can do, and then we'll use the result of that restriction to say, see, you need us, don't you? Look, you haven't accomplished this, or you haven't done this or that. Which, again, people can obviously still bypass and overcompensate and do it within the contrivance terms. But in a basic level, it's like, let's inhibit and restrict everything you can do in the pretense of some positive thing or protective thing. But in reality, it's a self-fulfilling need of contrivance, right? Don't restrict anything, and then people fend for themselves, like they've done throughout history, and they can easily do. And then they don't need you anymore, whether it be contrivance or a specific structure. So what it means is, there's no, there's no basis for it, and again, inhibit people and then have them defer to a lowest common denominator dumbed down state, and then use that to rationalize, oh, see, that's why you need to be restricted, or that's why you need to be, it's like a structure that preys on people, right? Like, somebody who's actually, again, like absolutist mentality or something like that, minimalist, they don't need anything, they don't require, desire anything, but somehow you're still forced to do it, right? You're living out in nature, but you still got to somehow pay taxes or get some permission, right? Even to not be a part of contrivance, you need the permission of contrivance. That's how overextended, outward, insistent it is. And also the, Christoph is an analogy for society that way. Like, it's benevolent. Like, oh, we're here to help you and we take care of you, but therefore we get to control everything you do, and you can never escape us, right? You can never remove the need for it. Again, it's like a doctor or something. Oh, we don't really want to cure you because that would invalidate ourselves, right? That's objectivity. It would, not perpetuate a needless process. You try to remove the need, but yeah, the point is, again, on all the superficial levels or the basic level, again, the camera angles are avant-garde, the music, the score is great, by Philip Glass. Father Colby's Preaching is a great song. Raising the Sail, a lot of good songs. Truman Sleeps, which sounds like that Carly Commando song every day. Basically, there's a lot of good aspects to it. The acting is good. I almost didn't watch the movie originally, or I held off watching the movie originally because of Jim Carrey, and I thought it would be like stupid comedy or something, or I thought it would have something to do with like Harry Truman or something. I had no idea what it was about. I went in totally blind. Obviously, they tell you what it's about very quickly in the movie, but it's just like, it really stunned me, right? I didn't go into it expecting a whole lot. Maybe my expectations were even diminished a little bit, like, oh, because Jim Carrey. But then after a while, that's not even relevant because it's just that good. Like, it's just that. Right, the screenplay, everything is at a high level, so he does a good job. I won't say that he's like the reason why the movie's so great or anything, but he does good. Christoph, again, is this godlike figure who's trying to play God and, you know, obviously benevolent. Shows you how hard society would try to prevent you from escaping it. If one person can be free, then everybody could be free. There's like this other element, but again, the point is that Truman's like the everyman. So this is the key point that I observed, right? These are the 2 points that I made and that are kind of profound and probably not too commonly said about it, even though it seems obvious to me. The Truman Show is not actually about reality TV or a satire on celebrity culture and stuff like that. It's actually, again, an analogy, an allegory for society itself. So again, Truman is you and me, the average everyday person, the everyman, and the Truman Show itself, Sea Haven, is society. And so it shows you that kind of on rails, everything is kind of scripted and curated and planned and prepared, and yet we still take it seriously at face value, false absolute, even though you see, again, the origin point, like, oh, you saw how it came to be. Oh, this person went to sales school for years and they practiced this, and oh, but look how genuine they are. Or like, everything is a process, everything is artificial. Doesn't mean it's bad, but it wouldn't be taken seriously or as an absolute. But that's why it becomes a contest of contrivance, like who can put up appearances the best. But it's the same process, so there'd be no need, or, you know, why would you even bother? So it's projected as far as incentive or something. So that's why non or unconditional is negative. Because it has no need of it, it doesn't reinforce it, it's projected into, oh, like inability to do the false absolute, now that's not absolute. But the other point is the fact that it's a midlife crisis movie. And why do I say that? Because if you look at it, what makes Truman actually realize that his life is a show? Or that something's up. I mean, he doesn't fully understand. Even at the end, he's still not really sure, right? He knows something's going on and he's trying to escape it, but, right, he even has to ask Christoph at the end, like, what is exactly going on? And then he says it's a show. So what makes him actually realize things are going wrong, right? He's been here his whole life. He's maybe noticed little small things. And you could say, like, oh, he wouldn't know the difference. So you could have made Sea Haven like anything. But again, people from their own perspective, Christoph says, people present the reality with which, accept the reality with which they've been presented. But again, by that logic, you could just make the Truman Show some invented fantasy world, and he would treat it as though that's real, as though that's absolute, right? So people are almost projecting their own, oh, this is what we're used to, so we're going to make a society like this, right? But there was no need to do that, right? Truman wouldn't have known the difference. So the way the Sea Haven is, again, it could be, the whole thing could be underwater in like a Bioshock dome or something, or it could be, you know, there could be, you know, fantastical, I don't know, like it could just be anything, and he doesn't know, he doesn't have anything to compare it to. So that would just seem how the world is to him. But again, everything's carefully curated and controlled, but you take it seriously, take it at face value, and therefore are easily controlled by it. And the other aspect of that is the fact that basically, again, you are the everyman, again, the midlife crisis thing. The fact is that you know, is it like, okay, he's suddenly old enough and now he's suddenly catching all these clues, but he's been, you know, there long enough, he's been old enough to think for himself for a while. So it's not just simply, oh, he's reached a certain age where now he's smart enough to notice this, right? Or, oh, things start falling in place and falling apart with the set, like, oh, the light falls down, and that's something he notices. Again, that could just be like from a helicopter or a plane or something that he knows or doesn't know is there, didn't notice. But right, always count on human error to break the illusion, and then blame that, like, oh, it's your fault for breaking the illusion, not that it is an illusion that you would evidently have issue with if you, right? Because that's often what the point of this objectivity is like, you're not saying what to do or what is or isn't, what should or shouldn't be, but you're just simply saying you should be able to see the nature of the process and then decide for yourself. But that's often how it is. People don't want to see the nature of the process. If you present it to them or reveal it to them, that's your fault, that's negative. And if you don't overcompensate for it or distract from it, that's your fault. So in other words, they're conveying that they would have issue with it, but they're just not aware of it, or they don't want to be aware of it. But either way, it's the same process. And then the other thing is, again, Truman, doesn't notice this, that his life is a show, or start to notice these things simply because, oh, he's old enough now, or because he's, smart enough now, or things are falling apart on set. Those things could have happened earlier in his life, or whatever. It wouldn't have been enough. The real motivating factor, if you really look at it, is, again, he's having a midlife crisis. And you might say, oh, that's because of the TV show. But it's actually not, right? This is the whole nuance and brilliance of it. He's living in a simulated reality, but that simulated reality is pretty accurate to real life, right? Sea Haven imitates a real life town. So pretend you grew up in a small town and you live there your whole life and you're working there, and then you realize, wait a second, now you have a midlife crisis. You've been stuck there your whole life. You feel like everything's been on rails. You never really thought for yourself. You never really had any freedom, right? You went to school, went to job, white picket fence, wife, whatever. Everything felt like it was kind of scripted and on rails, and you didn't really choose any of it. The nearness postulate didn't affect. And so now you have a desire. You want to go somewhere. You want to do something different, right? Go to Fiji, basically. He wants to travel. Which leads to the great line, like, oh, why do you want to go to Fiji? You've never been there. And then he says that exact thing. That's why people go places, because they haven't been there, right? That could almost be the line of the movie. Not that it's the best line, but it's thematically, like, that's the point, right? He doesn't want anything that's easy to explain. Oh, he wants money, or he wants something. No, he doesn't even know what he wants, right? Like, it's, again, the quest of the human spirit. Like, you just want something different, or some freedom, or not to be controlled, right, in every area for your whole life. So what that means is, right, that what triggers him to notice that isn't that, oh, a little piece of the set falls off, that could have been explained away, or he wouldn't care, or that could have happened throughout his life. It's not about any of that. It's about, he's having, again, Sea Haven simulates the real world pretty accurately, of living and growing up in a small town and never going anywhere and stuff like that. And so what is one element that it would simulate also inadvertently if you were simulating the real world? Oh, a midlife crisis, right? By simulating a real world society or town, you would also simulate certain things with it, right? So in the real world, people have midlife crises, and so would he. So now he's having a midlife crisis because he feels like his whole life has been on rails and controlled. But the reasoning behind that isn't that, oh, because his life is a TV show, you see. No, it would be because he's growing up in a small town and he's never gone anywhere, and he's been kind of stuck there, which many people do live like that. You live in the same place your whole life, you grow up there, whatever, right? So the understanding is that, right, by trying to simulate society, they also inadvertently simulate one aspect of it, which is the non-choice reaction, the midlife crisis. And so by doing that, right, now he reveals it because of that, not because of anything else predictable, right? Something falling apart on set, or this or that could be, again, explained away. No, he's having a midlife crisis and he wants to explore the world. He wants to go to Fiji. He wants to do something different. He's getting kind of burnt out and tired of the same routine, and he feels like his whole life has been on rails and he never chose anything, right? So he's having a normal, natural midlife crisis that people have, even in society itself, right, for kind of the same reason. So that's the point, right? He's having a midlife crisis that was simulated the same way that society is simulated, but they didn't account for that, right? That's why he's able to figure out the show, because, again, it doesn't matter, right, what the specifics were. So imagine doing the same thing in society, realizing everything's controlled and inhibited, and you'd have a little more illusion of freedom, and it's the same process. So the thing with that is the fact that, again, you grow up in a small town, you'd have that same desire. So he's having a midlife crisis that people normally would have in society. That's like an inadvertent simulation by trying to create a lifelike society. That would also be one element of it, that people want to break away, break free, have that midlife crisis. So that's what actually triggers them to realize it's a show. Right? To start to look for answers, to start to try to do something different. Right? There's no real simple explanation or reason for it. So again, the same way that people have that midlife crisis in society would be the same reasoning that he is having it. Again, not because it's a show, but because it's simulating a small town or a society in which your life is like on rails, everything's carefully curated, controlled, right? That is what it's simulating, right? So that's actually the reason, right? Not because it's a show, but because it's society, because it's operating the same way that society does, right? So in other words, you are Truman, and your life is exactly like that, even if it seems a little better, even if you have a few more options, right? It's effectively the same thing, where everything is on rails and heavily controlled, and you defer to it like a mindless sheep, right? And let it be in the name of some pretense, convenience, bread and circuses, relative comfort, safety, promises of that overextension. So what that means is the fact that and then it creates like this cultish gratification, like, oh, look, I'm a better trained, tamed animal of contrivance than you are, right? Like I overcompensate for a better or something, right? Assuming you desire the state, or it's an absolute state. So that's what social contrivance serves the purpose of. A very nefarious process. I call it anti-thought. It shouldn't be necessary. If something's a sound process, to speak for itself, or if it's not, then it doesn't. But it's a situation where, right, you shouldn't need that. It's a way to reinforce any state, no standard, no criteria. So again, the midlife crisis is actually what triggers him to realize it's a show, or to start questioning things, which again is something that happens in society for the same reason. So that's what it's really showing you. But it's not actually the fault of the show. Right, something deeper. It reflects something about actual life. And then the simulation aspect is also the same thing. It's like, people say society is a simulation. This is a clip that I just made discussing this a while ago. But, oh, society is a simulation, and it must be aliens, or it must be whatever, some other explanation, some computer simulation. But on an observable everyday level, you see how it's not like that, or how it is actually a simulation that we create ourselves. We indoctrinate our children when they're young. Then we have constant laws and reinforcement and rules and media influence and reinforcement, regurgitation. Everything is a process. You might think you desire something or you enjoy something, but it's actually just a overcompensation or a half-mass practice of an inherent tendency. And so what it means is that you basically, right, it's like you assuaging your cognitive dissonance, like, oh, that's funny or that's interesting, but the only reason why you find it funny or interesting is because it's an outlet for the inherent tendency that you have that's being repressed. Repression leads to obsession, right? That sort of overcompensative nature. And then it also is a fact of, the algorithm hasn't done anything for me this time. That's weird. Maybe it realized, like, oh, I can't retain those viewers, so, which sometimes I do a little bit, like, it'll give me like 20 people and then like a couple will stay, but no, you're doing that. Like, the reason why you like something is, again, cognitive dissonance, reaction, whatever. And the reason why, right, you do something, social contrivance, it might seem like, oh, that's just a normal, initial, gratifying thing, but it's only necessary or desired. Why? Because it's some imbalanced, contrivance state, right, that you're overcompensating for. So be aware of that. Whenever you're doing something, oh, you think you want that, but you really don't. Because the only reason why you want it is because of the imbalance of society, the cognitive dissonance, all of that you are subject to. So again, it's always a false absolute, and then you overcompensate for it. There's never any self-actualization, inherent-based state. Just kind of reinforce everything, try to overcompensate for it. It's an unsound, unqualified process. Yeah, oh, society is a simulation. And then you realize, wait a second, it is, but we created ourselves. again, you're on rails your whole life. You're indoctrinated when you're young. You go to school, you get a job, you know, white picket fence. There's so much social engineering, social indoctrination, all these false absolutes, all these rules, all these constant reinforcement. So it's like you're expected to behave a certain way, and you're forced to behave a certain way, and you're pressured to behave a certain way in every aspect, every area of life. And that creates like a uniform result, because most people are kind of lazy and not going to try to self-actualize, or if they do, you know, social stigma, shame, whatever. That's what you have to realize, right? People are trained and indoctrinated to be sort of their own enslavers in that way, in contrivance, where they'll enforce it themselves. Like, because you're subject to contrivance, you're a victim of contrivance when you're young in indoctrination. Now, not only are you going to accept that, but you're also going to force it on other people. If you see someone else doing something that's free or variable, you'll condemn it to try to reinforce and cope with your own state, because you couldn't realize, oh, wait a second, maybe I wouldn't want to do this, or maybe I could do something different too. No, it's a false absolute state, and anybody who deviates, they're the problem, right? Because they trigger your cognitive dissonance, so you'll kind of insist upon it and try to do that. But yeah, like, oh, society is a simulation, but you see how it comes to be, that every aspect of your life is on rails. There's rules for every little thing. You need permission for every little thing. Everything is inhibited. You need permission. You need, you know, overcompensation, constant social contrivance, you know, social engineering through media, through government, through you know, everyday people, right? All of that is basically, again, mostly everything is just initial reinforcement, but right, when you look at every aspect of society, how it's so controlled, so on rails, right? There's no freedom, there's no self-actualization. Now you say, oh, it's a simulation. It's like, that's how you can easily break the simulation. Just do something random or different that doesn't fit into that, and oh, look, he's breaking the simulation, or whatever. Like, yeah, people have that capability, but they don't do it. And when they do it, it's like a negative. It's like a false absolute half-mass state based on some pretense of functionalism, but it's not actually a sound process, or not absolutely accountable then if that's the basis to inhibit everything. Right, so then you'd be like a stickler, like, well, it has to be consistent, otherwise it's invalid if you're going to use that as a basis to inhibit everything, but people take it as an absolute, unquestioning way and then overcompensate for the cognitive dissonance instead of facing it directly, right, which creates an endless, arbitrary, reinforcing process. And so, otherwise, it leads to this long-form postulate, which, again, I wouldn't take any credit for it, nor would I even, you know, I'm like an unwilling vessel that, like, okay, it's unfortunate that I have to do this, but if this should have been done before, and people should be objectively aware. But again, it's like an overextended reactionary state that insists upon itself, like, oh, this is only necessary by overextension, some contrivance process, because there's so many people, and people keep pumping out babies, and so it's like, it might seem to be necessary, but it's only necessary because of that. You create the conflict yourself, right? Again, if the world is a village of 100, you wouldn't need all that, etc., etc. Nothing more than overcompensation, distraction, imbalance, overcompensation for self-created conflict. You sacrifice inherent thought, freedom, measure, value, self-actualization for half-mass conveniences of non-choice reaction from an inherent base, overcompensation, half-mass hedonism. But yeah, it sort of shows you the simulation aspect that, again, those are the aspects of life that are simulated, that, again, you're born, you don't choose your family, you don't choose where you're born, you go to school, you know, it's like this return to zero type mentality of you have to earn back the right to just be somewhat partially free in nature, right, the way you would be naturally. You have to earn back that right from society, from contrivance, like, even though there's no basis to take that from you at all, right? So that there's like this negative, dehumanizing thing, like, oh no, you have to, you're entitled, right? If you think you can just be free and self-actualize, or again, like a negative thing, oh, people are bad, so they need to be restrained, but then we empower people to that same end, which is a fallacy. And then it's also the fact of it's also the fact that the simulation thing, the kind of everything taken on an initial non-thought, non-self-aware, non-objective basis, everything projected to the ego of a half-mass self basis, even thought itself, like, it has to be projected and personalized. But the only way to look at it that way is if you don't think, or everything is at a surface level. And that might seem to be a good thing. That's positive, because thinking will cause you discomfort or cognitive dissonance. So of course, just don't think and then everything's fine, right? That's a great argument, right? Like if you don't like the way something looks, just close your eyes and then there you go, right? So it's the same process. Just don't think and then everything's okay. But the other part of that is the fact that like even thoughts are personalized or specified, but if you think enough, right, you think all the time, you think enough, you're self-aware, self-actualized, now you can't personalize thoughts anymore, because anybody can think anything, and you've thought a million different things, so how can that personalize you? Because you consider countless things, variable things, contradictory things. So again, not thinking might be necessary or desired to maintain your half-mass and private state, but that doesn't mean that state is absolute or whatever, like unquestionable. So yeah, those are the ways that, again, what triggers Truman to realize his life is a show and start to question things isn't some of the little holes that might show up in the show and the falling light and stuff like that, right? Those things could have happened and he might have missed them or not. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal. What really makes him want to explore and go away and do different things is he's having a midlife crisis, the same way people do have in society, so it kind of simulates that too. And it also simulates from society, or reveals the simulation that is society, right? That is, let me maybe look at my own video of that. I can't remember exactly how I explained that, but and I use the Truman Show as the thumbnail for that, like, right, society is a simulation, with Truman going up the staircase, and it's like, absolutist philosophy debunks the simulation theory, society is the simulation. Somebody left a very verbose comment too, which I didn't really even respond to. I think I read some of it, but let me read what I actually say. Like, I have closed captioning. Or you know what, let's just play the audio. Say that life or existence or the world is a simulation, right? Or everything in reality is a simulation. I have issue with that, and I always have to pause, because to me, I look at it more objectively. Like, what people are identifying is not really what they think they're saying, right? It's not so much about the existence or universe or reality is a simulation. A lot of the things they would point to or observe, they take for granted. And so in reality, society is a simulation, like all the artificial things we do and take for granted. Whether it be social interaction, whether it be morality, whether it be, all these things that we take for granted, and you can't do it. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. They can have their uses, they can be functional, right? But they're not real or absolute.
that Truman